biggest challenge for me in measuring teaching as learning or measuring the outcomes for students is knowing really what to measure. As a scientist, I'm trained in quantifying and measuring, and analyzing the data has its own challenges of, if you have multiple classrooms, you have different effects of the teachers, but that can be accounted for. What has been the biggest challenge for me is knowing what data are meaningful. And in my teaching as a research project, I did an intervention in our class to work on a basic skill that a lot of our students were lacking in their writing. And the writing assignment that was the intervention was for, the students all improved. Their grades improved on that. So that was a good outcome in my book. However, I still want to go back and contact students from that former semester to see if they really retained it. Because improvement on that assignment may not actually indicate a better quality learning. So that, to me, is the challenge, is making sure we're measuring the right thing.
Confirmation bias is my nemesis, and it props up frequently. And I talked earlier about how we do surveys, and then we use that to reinforce what we did right and what we did wrong. I know the mere way that we phrase a question can give away the answer or guide someone towards what we're doing, and so that's a serious concern for mine. I'm actually excited because we're at a conference right now, and the other day I met some psychologists who their specialty is actually in formative assessment. And so hopefully I get to bump into that person again, and I'm going to take them and show them my questions and get a professional opinion on that. It's really exciting to be able to talk to an expert in that field, because I'm not an expert at asking questions.
So one of the things I discovered is that there's a lot you can't take for granted when designing these assessments. There's a lot that I thought would be really clear in some of those questions I was developing. So there was a lot that I couldn't take for granted about what students saw or understood in my projects. And so as I started assessing it, I realized I had to go back to the drawing board, and it was a surprise, but it was a surprise that really made me think more deeply and critically about what questions and assessments do. I think when I create exams in the future, I'll definitely have this experience in mind.
Oftentimes, when I started developing the assessment, I used a Likert scale as well as free response, that the questions I were asking were not really addressing my TAR question or my teaching as research question. So I had to really sit down and intentfully develop questions that would help tease out the statistical significance that I wanted to see if it did or did not exist.
What I discovered from implementing my teaching as research project was that I actually had some expert bias happening on my part. As I developed a rubric to assess some of the concepts in the course that I was doing my assessment in, I realized that the students were overlapping the concepts. And so when I was working with an undergraduate TA to also evaluate together these responses, she also understood them in an overlapping way. And so I had to sort of take myself out of that situation and rewrite the rubric and rewrite the definitions and adjust the project after I had collected all my data.
The first thing that I discovered was that an assessment tool wasn't available for the question that I was asking. I was asking a specific question about not only evolution, for which there are many assessments, but in particular microbial evolution. So I took it upon myself to develop a new assessment tool to answer that question. And it turns out that survey was difficult to develop. It was much more challenging than I expected it to be. I think I came in with this naive notion that teaching would be straightforward. It's just a matter of being excited about something, going into a classroom, making a change, assessing it, and then getting a result and publishing it, and great, you've got this great education outreach piece. It's not that simple. It's actually quite challenging to do, to implement any sort of classroom change and to really know what the students know.
A research objective versus a research question is something that is difficult to grasp when you start to get into teaching, or even after you've taught for a long time, because it's really that piece of information or entity that you want to imprint on a student. And that's a lot different than saying, well, my teaching question is, does activity A help in the process of getting to B? Whereas a learning objective is we have this overarching goal for this part of what we're trying to do, and it's to understand this or to gain a competency in this. So when you begin to put in a TAR project that's helping you get to that learning objective, you need to assess whether that objective has been, not whether you answered the question, whether or not you're getting to that objective, you're imprinting that competency or piece of information or conceptual framework onto the student.
In our job, I mean, working with the TAR fellows, the graduate students and the postdocs, and defining their learning objectives for their project, it's sort of a pull, right? Because in some ways they've defined their research question, but they don't yet know what the metrics are going to be. And as you say, the metrics have to be associated with the outcomes of the project, of the implementation, for the undergraduate students in the class, right? And so a really well-defined learning objective is so critical because it allows them to measure something, to create their surveys, to create their metrics going forward, that gives them the data, as you say, that allows them to answer that bigger research question.